Okay, I am so excited. Hi, Kalin.
Hello.
Can you believe I interviewed you 4 years ago? Episode 97. I went and looked it up because I was like, I should mention Kalin's original episode. It was August of
For
2022.
my
Mhm.
God.
I know, right? I mean, a lot has changed, right? You're a mom. That's
I
a
was
big
to
one.
say, I have a child. That little old thing. Yeah.
But yeah, I was going down memory
Wow.
road. I was just like, oh, like
Dang.
when we first were messaging back and forth in the women and ADHD community, which no
Mhm,
longer exists, sadly. But
mhm.
I'm just so grateful for just getting to meet you and
Oh.
interviewing your wife Marnie too,
Mhm,
and just like you're such a
mhm.
huge part of my life, and I just got really verklempt, and I'm so excited to do this series with you. So a
Thank
little bit of
you.
background before I hand it over to you. So
Yeah.
basically, Kaylin is your I don't even know what to call you, so I'm going to let you talk about who
A
you are
little bit
because
of everything.
I know, right? But like officially,
Yeah.
you are a doctor of pharmacy.
Yeah.
And originally, I would like talk to you about medications
Mhm,
and kind of ADHD medications. But then I started working with Kaylin really about
mhm,
my own kind of physical stuff and my own
mhm,
body and, this neurodivergent head to toe that I was realizing a lot of it had to do with neurodivergence, but also like interviewing podcast guests over the years. I mean, it's been 5 years now of interviewing women and seeing these patterns of like, wow, that's another guest with like an immune disorder, right? Immune system
mhm.
disorder, like another guest with PCOS, another guest with
Yep.
fibromyalgia and autoimmune disorders, Hashimoto's. Like it just felt
Mhm,
like there was a lot of these co occurring physical things. And then also, learning more about hypermobility and hypermobile EDS and seeing a lot
mhm,
more about connective tissues and neurodivergence and these Venn diagrams of the brain and the body were so fascinating to me and coming up everywhere. And really, you were just like the person that I always came to because you seem to understand it all so well.
mhm.
You've explained it to me in so many different ways, and I wish I could say I understand it. I still don't really, which is why I was like, I feel like when we were talking about doing this series, it was like one of the benefits to me is like if I could get Kaylin down and record all of this, maybe I will at least have this for reference later. So
Just
essentially,
put
we
it
get
on loop. Yeah.
right. But what we decided to do, and what we wanted to do together, was to create this series as like as an addendum to the adult diagnosis experience of like it's not just a diagnosis of a brain, right? Like there is a lot happening below the neck that we are also just researching and understanding about like who we are holistically. And so, yeah, so I guess, for those listeners who haven't yet experienced you or heard about you on a podcast or heard your episode, like, why don't you just give us a little bit of background about who you are and what your interests are?
Yeah, for sure. So, like Katie said, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction too. And we love being a part of your family and we love just being a part of your life. So, yeah, so glad to be here. And yeah, so my background again, like traditionally is I'm a pharmacist, doctor of pharmacy. I'm still a licensed pharmacist here in the state of Nebraska. And when I got out of pharmacy school, I immediately did a residency that focused a lot in ambulatory care pharmacy, which is all like outpatient based chronic disease state management. And I really, really quickly became very frustrated and disenchanted with our healthcare system, recognizing how siloed our approach was. And I kept seeing all these patients come in sometimes with mental symptoms or neurocognitive symptoms or physiological symptoms. Each time it just felt like wall after wall after wall because every like providers and how our systems are set up is to just look at that condition or that organ or that symptom, but not to really look at this full big picture. And so I knew pretty quickly that that's what I not only wanted to do, but with how my brain works, it was like, that's the only way I can do it. Because as an ADHD autistic individual, which I was gonna say I didn't know at the time, I think I did know, but I wasn't officially diagnosed then. But I was like, yeah, if I see a hole in a system, I have to plug it. Like I have to. So I went and worked in academia for 8 years, thought that that's where that was going to be the place I was going to really be able to study this, make a difference. And I did to a degree. And then found that that maybe wasn't really exactly the case, as well as having my own symptoms kind of go down the drain. in a very dramatic fashion in my body, my health, ADHD symptoms completely off the rails, burnout, all these physical symptoms that maybe had been there, but now were just huge to where I couldn't stand for prolonged periods of time. I had brain fog. And no doctor I went to seemed to know what was going on other than just kept being like, oh, it's anxiety. Like, oh, it's, just,
You just
you're
need a
just
good
having a
night's sleep.
funk.
Yeah,
That's
I've been
exactly.
told that so many times from a doctor.
Yep. Yep. If only, right? If that only that would fix all the things. And I'll tell you now, as a mom of a 19-month-old who does not like sleep, that's not the only problem. So it's rough. But yeah, so then I left and I started this practice and I really went then and kind of got everything else I felt like I needed to be. I would say I feel like I try to be like a Yoda or like a Gandalf or a Dumbledore. I need a better female, a Professor McGonagall. I don't know. Of helping neurodivergent women who were, the word I use is quote unexplainably unwell,
Mhm.
where they have this kind of conglomerate of symptoms that aren't fully explained by any one diagnosis, and really starting to see then maybe in their symptoms that ADHD doesn't exist in a silo, right? It's impacted by everything else that's happening in the body. And so for their quality of life and their understanding of the brain and be able to work with their brain and to feel good in their life, it's not just understanding their ADHD and their ADHD brain, it's understanding their entire body. So my kind of goal and focus has always been around quality of life and what would the world look like if there were a bunch of healthy and well neurodivergent women in it. I think it would look pretty awesome.
Yeah. Right. I'm just reminded now of like when we first had our consultation and you said your line, let's make you make sense. And it was like
Yeah.
my whole body just exhaled where I was like, "What?" Like it's all I've been wanting my whole life, right? Of just that feeling of like trying to connect the dots, going to
Yep.
so many different siloed specialists, always
Mhm.
feeling like I was re-explaining myself and never really understood. And
Mhm.
the service you provide of like
Mhm.
looking at all of these different seemingly unconnected, like it's
Mhm.
just so valuable. So
Oh,
this is, I
thank
mean,
you.
we'll talk all about like go have a consultation with Kalin. You will never regret it. She is just
Oh,
incredible.
thank
But
you.
so one of the things that I guess we have a lot of topics we want to cover.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think, I lost that. Okay. So we have a lot of topics we want to discover or
Mhm.
talk about in terms of we talked about hypermobile EDS, connective tissues, histamines, the mast cell activation syndrome. Like I've gone down my own journey about hypermobility. I've also,
Mhm.
like, my daughter has gone down her own journey of understanding POTS and
Yep.
kind of that tachycardic system. So this we're not going to go too deep in for today into some of that stuff, but I think like, what I would like to do is have these episodes go deeper into like what is that connection and like
Yeah.
I always talk about ADHD as the gateway diagnosis of sort of
Mhm.
understanding your body so much more. But the first topic we decided we wanted to address because it is so popular and so trendy right now and seemingly like it just feels like the Wild West, as you said right earlier
Mhm.
before we hit record. Like there is a part of me that is like, oh my God, is this the miracle drug? Should we have this in our water? Should everybody be on this? And then at the same time being like, whoa, like the train is on the tracks, there's no brakes, and everybody seems to be talking about it and embracing it. And that's GLP-1s
Yep.
and semaglutides and tirzepatides and retatrutides and all of those. So
Mhm.
like I don't think we can go too deep into the use of them and the rise of them. That's probably better for another podcast. But what I want to talk about is what I'm seeing and what a lot of us are seeing is the use of GLP-1s for treating ADHD. So
Yeah.
what is going on there? Like what as a pharmacist, what are you seeing? What have you noticed in terms of like why GLP-1s?
Yeah. First of all, yeehaw, right? It's the Wild West. I just
It
had to,
really
I was
is.
like, lasso, like, here we go. It
Have
is.
we
And that's what,
seen anything like this? Like, I almost kind of
no.
feel like there's no precedent to this. Like, maybe SSRIs in the 80s felt like they flooded the market, but
Yeah.
this is just something like, I don't feel like we've seen anything like this where it's like, we're going to test GLP-1s for every random disease and dysfunction and just being like, yep, it works. Like, what
Right.
is going on?
Okay, so like we're gonna so get into it, and it is so exciting because like that is like the first thing, honestly. Like when I heard kind of about the GLP-1s and people going on these, and like kind of some of these benefits that expanded beyond kind of those traditional ones that we think about them regarding like weight loss and food noise, and we'll kind of get into that. Honestly, first off, it was my first reaction was a bit of curiosity with a healthy dose of skepticism, right? Because
Okay,
it was
good.
kind of like what, like what is this? And like also as a pharmacist, man, people come to you all the time, be like, I heard about this, I heard about this, I heard about this.
Yeah.
And you get a little kind of jaded when somebody's like, hey, I heard about this. And
Well,
you're like, yeah, yeah,
especially
yeah.
around diet culture too, right?
Yes.
Which is like, are
Yes.
we selling another weight loss drug? Is this
Yeah.
all about weight or is there
hmm
something deeper to explore
hmm
here? So,
Yep.
yeah.
But then again, here's the deal. As a pharmacist, I've definitely learned that when thousands of patients like, come to you or you hear are independently reporting that same unexpected effect, it's probably worth paying attention to, right? Like this wasn't just like one off, right? It was happening in my own patients. I was hearing it from my colleagues and like other providers I would chat with. And then you start hearing news articles about it. I know the New York Times just had an article about this too. So it was kind of everywhere. And, people weren't just saying things like, again, like I lost weight. Like they were saying things like my brain is quieter. I don't feel that same like compulsive drive to, like I had a patient who was just talking about, they were a big like nail picker.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that
Skin
was one
picking.
of,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's pretty much gone away since they've been on the GLP-1. I have a lot of patients talk about like, it's so much easier to like pause before reacting. That like kind of emotional, like that quickness has kind of quieted down. Or even I've heard things like my ADHD meds seem to work better. And then when you tie in again some of that chronic illness part of this as well, whether that's burnout, HEDS, long COVID, long Lyme. I'm hearing things too, like I can stand for longer periods of time. I had two patients recently within 4 weeks of starting GLP, their autonomic stability withstanding their POT symptoms dramatically improved within 4 weeks of starting a GLP-1. It was crazy. Minimal pain. So like we're hearing all of these things, like, right? These aren't weight loss outcomes. These are neurocognitive and physical outcomes. So what really fascinated me was that these reports were mirroring, though, what researchers were starting to study, that we were starting to hear that they were really looking more into. So they're starting to explore things like addiction, compulsive behaviors, reward pathways, inflammation, responses in autoimmune conditions, and then metabolic psychiatry as well. So I don't think GLP-1s are treating ADHD directly, but what I do think is they're revealing, though, how much metabolism, inflammation, and reward signaling influence ADHD symptoms. And I'll say specifically around that, and I don't know if it's probably not a term that a lot of people are familiar with, but the idea of metabolic psychiatry, right? So psychiatry traditionally has focused on neurotransmitters. So dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, right? When we talk about ADHD, we're always talking about neurotransmitters, but metabolic psychiatry is really asking a broader question. So what if some psychiatric symptoms are not only neurotransmitter problems, but also energy problems? So, in other words, can insulin resistance contribute to depression? Can inflammation worsen ADHD symptoms? Can mitochondrial dysfunction contribute to brain fog? Unstable blood sugar affect emotional regulation? And can improving metabolic health overall improve any sort of neurocognitive or psychiatric symptoms? And the answer increasingly for at least some people seems to be yes. And so this is super relevant for ADHD patients as that traditional ADHD model really focuses on dopamine and norepinephrine, but metabolic psychiatry doesn't reject that model. It just really like expands upon it. So an ADHD woman could have insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, poor sleep, elevated cortisol, autonomic dysfunction, and all of those factors can worsen executive functioning. So the question then becomes how much really of what we call ADHD severity is actually being amplified by metabolic dysfunction. And so that's where metabolic psychiatry really becomes interesting, and GLP-1s have so much excitement around them because they really intersect at multiple metabolic pathways that guide things like insulin sensitivity, inflammation, reward circuitry, energy regulation, addiction pathways. Yeah, patient is saying my brain is quieter. You're asking like, Is this a neurotransmitter effect, a metabolic effect, an anti-inflammatory effect, or all three? And the answer is likely a combination. And for those late diagnosed women with ADHD, I think this framework is really, really going to resonate because they've probably spent years being told that their symptoms were purely psychological, when in reality, we've got hormones, inflammation, insulin resistance, sleep disruption, chronic stress, nervous system dysregulation, all affecting the same brain they're trying to use to function every day.
Yeah, yeah. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about treatment-resistant depression too, because I think that's another
Yep.
topic that comes up a lot for those of us who were diagnosed with depression long before a
Yeah.
neurodivergent diagnosis, which is that notion of like, stop telling me I'm just depressed, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
and so, okay, yes, I don't even know where to start. So because it's, one of the things that I've talked about with you a lot is this, like, is this even ADHD that we're talking about right now? Like, what even
Mhm.
is ADHD? And for me,
Girl.
it's for me,
Mhm.
I've like tried to understand it as executive dysfunction in the way that it is experienced kind of
Mhm.
internally for so many women, like what we are struggling with when we talk about struggling. And
Yep.
the traits that are diagnosable for ADHD tend to be around executive dysfunction deficits. And so
Yep.
that can come from, there's the genetic element, but there's also like a lot of it is related to inflammation, right? And
Yeah.
so so what we know is that inflammation can be caused either by environmental factors, but it can also be caused by stress and trauma, right? And so it's
Mhm.
like then we get to this idea of like the chronic or the complex PTSD of just being a
Mhm.
woman, of being an undiagnosed neurodivergent person, right? Like there's
Yep.
all of these ways in which it comes back to inflammation for me around the
Mhm.
executive functioning. And so like when I think about why GLP-1s are working for executive functioning, like that's the first place my mind goes is like, well, it's just it's reducing that low level inflammation that all of us have been like girding in our
Yes.
bodies for our whole lives.
Yes. I mean, you're exactly right there. Like that part, again, it's taking away such a big stressor on our body because that inflammation is so encouraged by that dysfunction in our metabolic pathway. So if inflammation is creating this like kind of like cognitive drag, reducing inflammation is going to make the brain operate more efficiently. So again, like if we're seeing such a decrease in inflammation with the GLP, less fatigue, better clarity, improved emotional regulation, those are all things we'd expect if neuroinflammation were going to be reduced. Again, that's not like ADHD disappears, but it's the brain has way more bandwidth than for there not to be um uh again so much stress on that specifically.
I don't know the numbers around this. Mostly this is just sort of like anecdotal readings and the women I've been working with as clients, but like I know that a lot of women who are perimenopausal and menopausal, so like women kind of over the age of 50 are going on GLP-1s, I think faster than any other population, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so what is the connection there between like we talk about estrogen and estrogen levels and their relationship to dopamine? How do hormones and estrogen relate to this metabolic
Mhm.
psychiatry? Is that what you
Yeah. Yeah, metabolic
I feel like
psychiatry.
every
You're
single thing I
there.
have to be like, explain like I'm fine. Explain like I'm fine.
No.
But yeah,
Yeah. I
what's the hormone
there.
side of this?
Totally. Here's like the Poindexter. I have to say too, when Katie and I were talking about starting this, I was like, "Are you are you asking me apart?" Because every 2 seconds, I'm like, "Well, there was a
I know.
study." Like,
I love it. But this is what I mean about like I
yeah.
come away from these conversations with my mind blown. And also I'm like, I don't really understand a lot of what you said, but it sounded really cool. So yeah.
Well, and again, I'll say that part of it is like there's so much in the stuff that we talk about too that we don't have a perfect in-depth understanding of. And I think that's what is hard because talk about the Wild West, like we are just at the beginning, the grassroots of really even understanding what inflammation is, like
Oh.
how the metabolic pathway connects to everything. And this is something I'm going to dive into to this answer here that what I'm going to talk about this combination with estrogen, metabolic system and inflammation, but even understanding how like the body communicates with the brain and how all these receptors interact. And again, that it's not siloed. So when we think about women over 50, women in perimenopause and menopause really, seeing a lot of benefit with these and this kind of puzzle piece here is so when we think about estrogen, it impacts dopamine, it impacts insulin sensitivity, it impacts inflammation, it impacts energy metabolism. Dude, that's like everything right there that GLP-1s help with, right? So
Yeah.
as estrogen declines, many women notice worsening ADHD, that increased weight gain, poorer sleep quality, greater insulin resistance, and increased inflammation. All those systems are interacting. So a GLP-1 isn't replacing estrogen, but it may improve a lot of those downstream metabolic consequences that emerge when estrogen declines, which is why a lot of women will describe feeling like, okay, like I actually am feeling like myself again when I start this GLP-1. Sorry, thank you for giving space for my cough.
You're welcome.
I love that. It was perfect. So again, when we're thinking about all of this crossover and again, like the body and like hormones, why all of this really matters, the brain is such an energy hungry organ in the body. Executive functioning is expensive. Attention is expensive. Impulse control is expensive. We need all systems and hormones operating on go to pay the price, right? To pay the piper. But when the body is inflamed, the brain has fewer resources available for those higher order tasks. So, brain energy, the brain uses 20% of the body's energy, even though it only represents about 2% of the body weight. And so, executive function, things like attention, planning, emotional regulation, and impulse control are all energy intensive. And if the brain cannot efficiently access or utilize fuel, cognitive performance is going to suffer. And one of the most interesting things too is when we're often thinking about kind of like the brain and the body, I think people often, and I think especially ADHDers, we tend to think about, we think the brain's controlling everything, right? But so much of what controls our autonomic nervous system, right? So the vagus nerve, which has GLP-1 receptors on it. So again, GLP-1 isn't just found in the gut, it's also found in the brain. It's found in the brain stem, the vagal nerve. 80% of vagal fibers carry information from the body to the brain. So, not the other way around. So, many people think of the brain as directing the body, but in reality, the body is constantly reporting its status back to the brain. So, that vagus nerve really like has this information highway, I guess, connecting the gut, the liver, the pancreas, the heart, and the immune system. So, when GLP-1s activate that vagus nerve after eating, those gut cells release GLP-1, and that GLP-1 then activates receptors on the vagal sensory neurons. And that travels then to the brain stem, and the brain receives messages like eaten, calories are coming, slow down, we don't need to look for more food. And then the brain adjusts appetite, satiety, glucose regulation, and reward behavior, which means that GLP-1 can affect the brain without ever physically even entering larger portions of the brain itself, which is pretty dang cool. And so for ADHD, this is really intriguing because that means, again, the vagus nerve doesn't just transmit hunger signals, it also influences emotional regulation, stress responses, attention and arousal, impulsivity, emotional reactivity, overwhelm, all of these things. So instead of the brain receiving like this constant stream also of maybe we're hungry, maybe we need dopamine, maybe we're stressed, the GLP-1s are kind of turning down the static of the signal. They're really improving the signal quality. And when, again, talk about back to like women, midlife, when you take away the estrogen, that signal, the static becomes even more intense. So, like having that downstream consequence of an impaired metabolic pathway work much more efficiently is going to be huge for them having an improved quality of life and improved executive functioning.
Now, you mentioned earlier about like some of your clients, patients, you noticing that the GLP-1s are actually helping the ADHD meds. And so, Mike, I have a
Yeah.
bigger question around like, what is it safe to continue taking? Like, are there any negative interactions if somebody decides to take a GLP-1s, either in terms of like estrogen, like hormone HRT, or SSRIs, or ADHD meds, like, or do you just continue as normal with your
Really
cocktail
great.
of medication?
That's a really great question. Of course, always make sure you talk to your pharmacist, talk to your doctor about your meds specifically, including your supplements as well, just to check and be sure. But the really great thing about the GLP-1s is they, compared to a lot of just meds in general, not a ton of drug interactions. We do have to be careful about a couple of different things or adjusting doses sometimes, because that's really the biggest thing is a lot of the drug interactions around GLP-1s aren't direct. It's a physiologic interaction. So if we think about like stimulants specifically, take that for example. So GLP-1s, the big side effect that probably everybody hears about, and again, part of the reason why it works is it slows gastric emptying, which that's going to alter the absorption timing of oral medications. So anything you take orally could potentially be impacted. For ADHD patients, I'm usually saying things like, hey, pay attention to any changes in how effective your stimulant is, or stacking of appetite suppression, because we know sometimes stimulants also suppress that as well. Dehydration, constipation, things like that. So with that slowed gastric emptying, it can take longer for the medication then to take effect, right? It takes longer to kind of reach your system to be able to start breaking down. As well, the medication is going to stay in your system longer because of delayed gastric emptying. So you may need to take it earlier for it to work. So if you're used to taking it and you're like, I need it to work at 9 a.m., I could take it at 8 and that's no problem. But all of a sudden now you're not noticing it take effect till 9:30, 10. Okay, we may have to up that time because of the delayed gastric emptying. Or you may need to lower the dose. That's probably the thing I found the most then is needing to decrease that dose. And part of that is that effectiveness piece, that delayed gastric emptying, but also if they're part of the problem of the executive functioning was metabolic dysfunction, all of a sudden we may not need as high of a dose either. And we may start seeing more of adverse effects from the med without the benefit. So if the medication isn't working as well, we may also need to look at other things again, like dehydration, nutrition issues to make sure also that the GLP-1 hasn't caused a different physiologic issue that could then worsen executive functioning. And so less worry really on drug-drug interactions with this med, but more about the physiologic changes it causes that can then impact the medication.
Yeah, which people with ADHD are really good at observing the different effects of medication. I can attest. I'm
Uh-huh.
super
Uh-huh.
attentive to how I'm feeling from day to day.
Well, that actually highlights a really, really, I think, important part about GLP-1s in ADHD is so one thing that's missing often from that broader conversation around GLP-1 conversation is interoception.
Yeah.
So if we already have a hard time with that, and then you give us a medication where the purpose is partly to like, especially like to suppress hunger signals, like that can become problematic. Plus, you're also, here's the irony, right? You're given this GLP-1 med that requires a ton of executive functioning often to even get. So all of a sudden, patients are having to manage prior authorizations, refill timing, med shortages, injections, dose titrations, maybe insurance appeals or like inconsistency in where you're getting it. Or I have some patients who have to go into the office every time they get their injection, depending on what their office, how their system runs. So a lot of ADHDers, even though, some of it sounds like, oh my gosh, look, this is so awesome. It improves all these metabolic things. It's really hard though to try to do a medication and be on board with this when the healthcare system really asks them to perform dozens of executive functioning tasks while simultaneously trying to even get them
Oh
met.
my God. Preach. Yeah. But it does feel like the tracks are being laid for a much easier sort of
Yeah.
distribution and less costly distribution. Like it does feel like we are going in a direction of like mass widespread usage. And so, what does that mean for us? And like, should we be excited or should we be really worried? Because, and I don't want this episode to come off as like a
Sure.
commercial for GLP-1s,
No.
but it is fascinating. And
Yeah.
there is a part of me that's like, is there anything, any red flags right now other than like the digestive stuff that some people are talking and the price too and the cost,
Yes.
right? I think the biggest red flag, and for me, as somebody who has been very open about my own history with yo-yo dieting and diet culture and
Hmm.
has like really embraced body neutrality, I feel like there was like we were really going to a really good place of accepting all bodies and sizes and
Yep.
redefining how we look at health, and now we've really done this backslide with GLP-1s in terms of diet culture. And so I
Hmm.
mean there is a part of me that feels wary. I think there's a lot of disordered eating in neurodivergent communities, especially binge
Yep.
eating. And so it's like, what are your thoughts? Because you were talking about food noise earlier.
Yep.
and
Yep.
just the compulsive static. And I like how you talked about like turning the noise down on that
Mhm.
static. But also, to the flip side of that, like, are we turning it down too much so that we are putting ourselves in real danger in terms of like we're already forgetting to eat on ADHD meds? Are we setting ourselves up for some real disordered eating? I don't feel like I'm seeing a lot of that. And I don't know if that's just the loudness of diet culture, just being like, it's fine, weight loss is great. But like, are you
Mhm.
seeing people like having any real like side effects in terms of like nutrition? And, I know they talk about like muscle mass and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Exactly. There are some things, again, that we definitely need to be wary of. Again, the biggest thing, I would say the biggest kind of like side effect that I do see is the issue with the delayed gastric emptying causing issues where we kind of get like everything basically backed up. And then if that stays that way, that's really not a good thing. Surgery things can then happen, et cetera, et cetera. I have not had any patients have that. Talking just to my own provider, just kind of in conversation, just kind of picking her brain about it, my own PCP. She's had a number of patients have to have that happen. But again, I will say for a lot of patients that is dose dependent. So high doses being more likely to again cause that. Um which I should also say that like when we're also exploring these medications outside of weight loss, again, they're not, none of them are FDA approved for this, but if you have a conversation with your doctor and that is something that is considered, they are also looking at doing what we'll call microdoses, so much
Mhm.
smaller doses too, where you may be able to receive the metabolic benefits without having the more intense delayed gastric emptying and maybe not as much weight loss. So you may not see as many of those benefits from that, which I think kind of helps parlay those kind of, scarier issues like you talk about, like them kind of maybe either being abused or contributing to diet culture issues. I haven't really seen a ton of that. And actually, like you said, I have a number of patients with binge eating disorders, and I have seen these be helpful very much again in reducing some of that food noise. But I have had still patients though, it doesn't solve the full problem. I guess I'll say. And I think maybe that's a reality too, to like, again, see with these also is like so many, like you talked about earlier with ADHD, it's an onion of contributions that impact executive functioning and ADHD severity. These meds are helping with one aspect of that, but it's not going to take away all of that. So we're still sometimes left with things to identify and course correct. So yeah, those are kind of the big worries, but right now I'm not seeing it be at least this big I guess scary thing and that those impacts yet. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll
Well,
see.
and the other thing that just came to me too was this notion of I think there's like an existential or philosophical notion around like medications that you should take for the rest of your life and medications that you shouldn't take for the
Mhm.
rest of your life, right? And this kind of
Yeah.
falls into this like, well, we're not really solving the issue. Like I see a lot of influencers, like medical influencers, who will
Mhm.
talk about this like in this very shaming way of like, you're not
Mhm.
really changing your lifestyle. Like always coming back to this idea that if you just like got off the couch and went
Yeah.
for a run, your life would be solved. And so they're
Uh-uh.
still working within that framework and not really
Mhm.
looking at what is happening on a metabolic level as like disease.
Yes.
And so there is this shaming of like, well, this, what are you going to do? You're just going to be on this for the rest of your life. But
Mhm.
like, we don't have that shame around other medications that are just
Nope.
like, yeah, you're on this for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Right, and so but I do think, any kind of medication, especially what it's costing right now for a lot
Yeah.
of people, it's daunting to think about, like, "Do I have to be on this for the rest of my life?" And I think that's a wider conversation about the pressure to wean off of medications as soon as
Oh,
possible that's happening
completely.
at right now, on a national scale too.
Yes.
But I guess I wanted to also get back to this idea of food noise too, because I feel it
Mhm.
like or even just the compulsive static. I'm fascinated, like, what do you think causes the compulsive static? Is that also just like inflammation and ADHD genetics and like what do you
Mhm.
think? Like it feels like a little bit of a chicken egg thing there in terms of like calming it down versus what's creating it in the first place.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of chicken the egg component, and I think there's a lot of different possibilities that can kind of contribute to that. But Generally, again, like food noise, really, when it comes down to it, it really is reward seeking behavior. So that when we talk about the ADHD brain, it's constantly scanning for stimulation, novelty, dopamine, and relief. I think it's what we don't talk about enough too, that the ADHD brain is also constantly looking for that relief. And food happens to be one of the fastest and most reliable sources of dopamine. So GLP-1s appear to dampen that activity in those reward circuits involving dopamine signaling. So the result isn't less pleasure, it's less urgency. So patients will often describe it as like, I can still want something, I just don't feel as driven by it. That's a very different neurological experience because it's not having, like, we are seeing those adjustments in those dopamine pathways. So we're not needing that same stimulation, novelty, dopamine relief. It's just the one that's filling it, which is again why we're seeing this being studied in addictive behaviors, because that's really why things are addicting, right? Even when it comes to alcohol, alcohol is addicting, not because like people who struggle with addiction, it's not like the alcohol, it's what the alcohol is doing, right? And then the brain learns, oh, that helps that quickly. I want that. And that's what starts creating those pathways. So the same here with this, like it's going to quiet that piece that really is just looking for something to fill those receptors, that pathway, that dopamine to fill that piece. And if we don't have that anymore, then we don't necessarily need that for that reason.
Hmm. So then with by that logic, wouldn't GLP-1s replace most ADHD meds? I mean, should they be working together, or is it like, does it feel like a viable replacement?
So that's a really good question. So I really think that more than likely they're going to be things that like really work in tandem,
Hmm.
right? So I think that what we'll likely see is the GLP-1s are going to be especially relevant again for people who have metabolic issues, right? Metabolic dysfunction that's driving that issue with dopamine, right? And dopamine regulation. But that dopamine can be impacted also beyond things that are just related to metabolic dysfunction. I mean, even when we take the hormone piece of that too, like the GLP-1 is helping a lot of that downstream effect, but the estrogen is still a big part of that. So like, are GLP-1s completely replacing meds for people who are in like perimenopause, menopause? No, not necessarily, but they may be working in tandem as well with the estrogen. So, and the other thing too with these is every medication, we're trying to get the dose high enough to where the med is effective, but not so high that we're seeing a lot of adverse effects. And sometimes too, for people, we see this even like with stimulants, we may not be able to get the dose high enough to get all the benefit that we want in those areas. And so sometimes having meds in other areas as well can then be helpful to kind of even that out. So we don't really have evidence yet to support that GLP-1s alone are going to be it. But for a certain subgroup of people, I think it's going to be a really important tool. So those, again, who struggle with insulin resistance, binge eating, chronic inflammation, reward dysregulation, or other metabolic based issues, they're really a modifier of the ADHD experience than a primary ADHD treatment.
Yeah, so fascinating. Where do you
Yeah.
think this is going to be going? I mean, now we're getting we're having pills, we're having like monthly injections instead of weekly. Like it just feels like, I don't know, do you have any theories about what's going to happen next, or where this is leading? Do you think we're all going to
Yeah.
be on GLP-1s? Like I feel like so much of this
Yeah.
feels very much like the end of like the kind of biohacking version of the end of crap. What's the movie with Evie and Wally? Well,
Yes. Oh my
yeah, the
gosh.
dystopian version of Wally, but
Y-
instead we're all going to be like biohacking.
Yes. Yes.
But this
One time,
notion of
Marty
like,
and I
go
say we
ahead.
did a Disney run and we dressed as the by and large people on the ship for the runs. Yes, I'm yes, right there with you. It was great. But yeah, like yeah, so here's the deal. The part there's the I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a I don't know, positive Polly at heart where I do tend to kind of look at where do I think this is going in a lot of good ways.
Uh-huh.
And where I think this is going in ways that gets me really, really excited is this expansion of the idea again of metabolic psychiatry. And again, no longer, I think it's really expanding our research and people's eyes and providers, other providers beyond me, looking at things and saying, hey guys, this isn't just one thing influencing this condition. That's not true for any condition. And so, what I'm so excited about is it's really expanding the research around the impact of when we help somebody's system that is really struggling with metabolic function, look at everything that can improve. I mean, again, like I'm hearing, Marnie, my wife, has multiple sclerosis. And in that community, there's talk of people with autoimmune conditions getting off their biologics that come with awful side effects because they're able to manage them on GLP-1s. And again, this isn't in every patient, but some people are finding that. So then looking at, okay, was their autoimmune condition really influenced by the stress of a dysfunction metabolic system? Like that's the stuff I'm so excited about, is really this expansion of us understanding the body and the brain and how all of this connects in this really, really full picture. So that's my big like woohoo, like part of that. Cause I've been waiting for that. And if it took the GLP-1s to start driving the research for that and the understanding of that, that's really, really cool.
Right. Yeah, have you that just reminded me of psoriasis because that's another one that I sort of feel like is one of the like fibromyalgia, which is just like this huge
Mhm.
first of all, this huge medication industry
Yeah.
with massively scary side effects and a lot of people who have it and don't know why. Is there
Mhm.
anything about GLP-1s and psoriasis? I guess I could Google
Yes.
it, but oh
Yes.
yeah?
Yes.
So
Yes. Yep.
similar?
Yep.
It falls under that
Exactly.
same umbrella. It's like, is there anything that is doesn't seem to be affecting? I Googled it just, earlier today, and it looks like the trials for Alzheimer's were kind of not
Mhm.
as impressive as they were hoping it would be in terms of dementia.
Yes. So I think that what you're seeing though is how many conditions, which are a lot of them, and I almost want to say most, that are influenced by a dysfunctional metabolic system, and how I want to say easy it is for a metabolic system to start to have issues, to start to have struggles, because it is influenced by so many different things. So it can be a piece behind the added stress that can lead us down to any sort of condition. Now, yes, like there are things then where there are conditions where that maybe isn't as much of the primary impact, or you may see it for a smaller subgroup of patients where it's maybe that primary driver where you don't for another subset of patients. And again, I'll say that's even what I'm seeing right now with, again, most of my patients, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, long COVID, and then kind of a conglomerate of a bunch of different autoimmune conditions. And I'm probably seeing, gosh, I'd say maybe about 60% of my patients on GLP-1s have really, really positive side effects in at least some of their symptoms, maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. And then I'm having probably, yeah, I would say about 30% then of patients who are on GLP-1s where those impacts are pretty minimal. And then we have to start looking at, okay, like what else is going on, right? So, like, I have one patient who, was like, maybe there was a little bit of improvement in some resiliency of her symptoms, again, prolonged standing, things like that. But overall, not a huge impact. Well, we got her lab work back and her iron and ferritin were completely abysmal. So, yeah, like your executive functioning is going to be rotten and you're going to be super tired and fatigued and hungry and all of these things. No matter what we do for the metabolic system, we got to fix this other thing. So, it's just one huge area of the body that has so much impact. So I get like that's where I'm the most excited. So do I think it will be in the water? No. Do I think everyone will be on it? No, but I think it will be a med that should be in conversation around a lot of conditions of, patients going ahead and like asking their doctor, having conversations like with their doctor about things kind of like, what is my metabolic health? Like, could insulin resistance be contributing to my symptoms? Do I have metabolic risk factors? Are there inflammatory issues affecting my health? How are my hormones influencing my ADHD? About inflammation? How are sleep and stress affecting my executive functioning? And then, would a GLP-1 be appropriate given my overall health picture?
Mhm.
And again, this big thing is like ADHD and any of these conditions, they don't exist in isolation. The brain is connected to the immune system, the endocrine system, the gut, and the metabolic system. So that future of ADHD care and also care of all these other conditions we're talking about isn't really choosing between psychiatry and metabolism. It's really recognizing that they're deeply intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds like also this eureka moment with this medication. And like you said, like it's pointing to the connection between metabolic system and how it's affecting the brain. And
Yep.
it's almost like it's pointing to like how we can then see all of this from a holistic viewpoint, and then see it from a preventative viewpoint, right? Which is like,
Yeah.
because my interest has always been in the like, why are we diagnosing people for systemic issues? Like, why aren't we
Mhm.
focusing, like, if we're diagnosing individuals and we're treating individuals, it's giving us a reason to not look at the systemic issues that are creating the inflammation and the disease in the first place, right? So it's like,
Preach.
right? Like, it feels like seeing the way in which all of this one approach and this one medication is affecting people on such a massive scale, like, it it feels like it would open up more conversations for, like, systemic prevention, and looking at, like, there might be this connection between the rise of autoimmune disorders in young women and stress, and, like, looking at ways that we can kind of, I guess, get to the nitty-gritty of what
Mhm.
is actually going on with people with these seemingly disparate diagnoses.
It's holding up a big mirror, right?
Mm.
And I think that though, I think with it should come an apology to a lot of neurodivergent women with complex chronic illness because they're likely the ones who've been told things like it's all in your head, dismissed, given, pick your name out of the hat psychiatric kind of like diagnoses that was ill fitting. It's kind of like especially the neurodivergent women who are having success with these medications, they're likely the ones that current society has kind of labeled like the modern hysterical woman, right? Like that, you follow back hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years of history, and there's always been that. Which I always find this weird connection we found in digging back through. One of my family members loves to, look back down our lineage. One of my ancestors was one of the last witches tried in Salem. And her husband broke her out of jail. She was sentenced to death, but they were able to escape to New York, and hence why I'm here. But I can't help but think, why was she targeted? She was
Yeah.
probably neurodivergent. She was probably hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, right? She was different in all of these different ways. And she made a great target as this quote, like modern hysterical woman. And that's what this is now. And again, I think this med holds up a big mirror to people who struggle with those symptoms. And then, like you said, all of the things that we have just set up in our, capitalistic society that puts a lot of stress on the individual. And so this is one of the things, though, where I think a lot of people get on maybe the negative, darker side. That would be really great if we started looking at that mirror. But I think instead it'll kind of be like, oh, cool, we don't have to change any of those systems because we've got this med that'll
Just
just
take it.
kind of,
Yeah. Right.
do it for us. Yep.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
part too. Yeah. My goodness. This is so exciting. I mean, there's so many topics I'm excited to tackle with you. Thank
Hmm.
you so much for
Yeah.
agreeing to do this and sharing your wisdom and understanding. And
Yeah.
while I blink back at you, just being like, I kind of understand as I get, I just find it all so fascinating, like I said. And
Yeah.
so next time we're going to talk about hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is another really
Yes.
sort of big topic, and a lot of people, a lot of research around it right now. And I think
Hmm.
that is such a fascinating field
Yeah.
and overlap. So I'm really excited to talk more about that with you. What other topics should we talk about? I mean, also, if you're
Ooh.
listening and you want us to talk about, some topics around chronic pain, inflammation,
Hmm.
anything, we're really just looking at the connection between a neurodivergent brain
Hmm.
and everything else that's happening in our bodies
Yeah.
that's making us
Yes.
hysterical and hormonal, hypermobile.
Yeah, whatever is your version of modern
That's
hysterical
what we
woman,
should call
right?
this series,
Let us know. There you
right?
go. Yeah.
Hysterical,
100%.
hypermobile, and
Yeah.
hormonal, and yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think also like MCAS too is another one I
Mhm.
really would love to dig into a little more.
Yeah.
Um,
MCAS, I think POTS, like you said, I think pain. I think even also just talking about like having conversations like with your doctor also about all of this too. And kind of like, how do you even like navigate all of this or even navigating? And I know this is something that pops up for a lot of my patients too, of like feeling like, is it safe for me to have these conversations like with my doctor, or do I feel safe to, or like even to tell them about like my ADHD? Like, is that going to like, I think really what I'm getting at is like bias in the healthcare system, which is 1,000% there. Like a lot of even what we're talking about is you know laid into it being a necessity to have a provider who is able and willing to be a thought partner and who believes your subjective experience, which should be present no matter the office you walk into. But we both know that's not, unfortunately, the reality. So I think there's also a whole array of topics that could go down that road. Autoimmune conditions, I think would be interesting. Oh, long COVID. I think
Yes.
that would be interesting. Give them to us. And I have to, because this is just, maybe I'll have like a little nerd fact at the end of every episode. If you wait till you get your little sprinkle of nerd magic. Okay, so I think this is the coolest thing. So when I was in pharmacy school, true nerddom, just push my little glasses up. GLP-1s were my favorite drug because I thought it was so cool how they discovered it. So they were able to make this drug from studying the saliva of the Gila monster. So it was back in the 90s, researchers were able to really study the saliva hormones, and they found this one called Exendin 4, and that basically mimics GLP-1s that are found in humans. But the Gila monster uses this peptide to be able to regulate its metabolism and sustain energy because it only eats like 3 times a year, which is crazy, right?
Okay.
So the Exendin 4, they found that, that like it didn't break down in the bloodstream like GLP-1 in humans. It tends to break down in the bloodstream within minutes. So they were able to look at this Exendin 4, this really highly resistant to enzymatic breakdown peptide that really allowed it to have blood sugar control and appetite suppression. And from that, they were able to make the GLP-1 receptor agonist for exenatide or Vieta, which isn't really as popular anymore, but that laid the groundwork then for them creating semaglutide and tirzepatide.
Mhm.
So what you're taking then was discovered from the Gila monster, which I just think is so cool. So there's
Super
your
cool
little
nerdy
med
fact.
fact.
And I do not believe any Gila monsters have been diagnosed with ADHD. So I think their executive functioning is on
Ah,
fleek. But like that was not that long ago, right? Like I feel like we are
no.
just this one massive human experiment right now.
Yep, 100% we are. These were just coming out, honestly, when make me feel very nice and old, but like when I was graduating from pharmacy school, which was like
Yeah.
2012, that was Byetta and exenatide was like just coming on the scene as like, whoa, cool. We've got this, weight loss med for patients with type 1, type 2 diabetes. And that was kind of the hot thing, but it came with a lot more side effects. And then from there, they kind of kept, working on it, finding these new versions. So yeah, you're right. We don't know. And I think that is the big thing when we think about kind of the ethical guardrails of all of this is really, again, that we'll leave you here with, and in talking with your doctor too, is that exactly we don't know. And so just really understanding the possible risks of that, the possible benefits of the medication just along with that. And again, I guess the thing I'm seeing though is for these patients who are really struggling in these ways, there's a lot of desperation. And so a lot of willingness to be like, hey, let's give this a go. So,
And to
anyways,
bypass medical consultation, which I also really worries me that there's so much like kind of this gray market ordering of stuff
yes,
online and
yes,
it's all happening so fast and there hasn't been a lot of studies and not a lot of these things
yep,
are FDA approved. It's like madness.
it is.
So
Yeehaw.
but I feel like a lot of at least PCPs are on board with this. Like I'm not getting I'm
Yes.
not hearing from a lot of people who are getting like gaslit by their
Nope.
PCPs about this. And and you also think about like our government right now has been
Yep.
very vocal about ADHD meds and SSRIs, but they've been curiously quiet about GLP-1s. So like nobody, I don't feel like if this is something you want to try, I don't think there's going
Yes.
to be a lot of backlash. I mean, other than the
Nope.
expense, but
Nope.
yeah.
I haven't had any patients yet really have much pushback at all. So like you said, I think a lot of providers, for whatever reason, this has been the thing, back to my positive poly moment, that is opening their eyes to the impact of improving metabolic health in a lot of different areas. And that a lot of us, again, because of our systems, because of a lot of things, struggle with metabolic. So I think a lot of providers are pretty on board to be in conversation about this. So open the dialogue and yeah, see if this may be something that will be helpful for you.
Yeah, tread carefully.
So, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Like
I
that's what I
know.
mean. I'm like, I don't want this to seem like this crazy commercial
No.
for GLP-1, but I also feel like it
No.
is this miracle drug. Like I'm really at that sort of intersection of curiosity, amazement, and
Yeah.
also, like you were saying earlier, like there's some cynicism and
Yep.
concern.
Yes.
but also not really knowing what to make of it.
Well, what I think, if anything, a commercial for that I will say is like, I guess my push always for patients is exactly what I said earlier, is that what I get excited about in the push for is to open the dialogue with your providers about what is the status of my metabolic health? What are my metabolic risk factors? Do you think that this could be impacting any of the things I'm struggling with? That's exciting to start having those conversations, because what you're opening up the dialogue about is you are unsiloing whatever you're experiencing. And that's exciting. And that I encourage you to do.
I love
So
that. Well, thank you.
cool.
You're awesome. This has been great. I cannot wait
You're
to have
awesome.
more conversations.
Heck yeah.
All right.
I'll be back.